One thing I like to do before we dive into this discussion is just a little bit of housekeeping. First of all, I want us all to remember there's a phrase I want to pull up. Um, just one thing I want us all to keep in mind. This type of work, in order for it to be effective, you need to have a sense of a safe space, if you will. But that term safe, you have to use it in a careful way because a space might not be safe in that sense for everyone. So instead, the language is a brave space. Does that make sense? It's a space for people of color, for people of diverse backgrounds, anyone really, to bring themselves to the table, to share their experiences, share their heart, and other people can come to that space with an openness to learn and to learn from each other. That might be uncomfortable, but it's still a place where we all can learn from one another. Does that make sense? So I want us all to have a brave space. I also want acceptance for all. We might not agree with other people's perspective, but we can certainly accept them for who they are, their truth, their experiences, and their perspective. I'd encourage us to try to take that in and to listen today. I know that this process on both ends can be uncomfortable sometimes. Perhaps learning new information can have an emotional impact on you. That's not always comfortable. But if you know going into this experience that you might feel uncomfortable, but it's worth it because it's part of the learning process, I think that it will go a little bit easier, a little bit better. Another key is just to be open to different perspectives. That's the whole idea of diversity. Diverse group of people, of cultures, ways of life. People are diverse in all sorts of ways. So I think just being open and accepting and receptive to that experience is what's most important.
This slide here is really just to emphasize who is involved, who started this challenge. The people who started it, their name is Dr. Eddie Moore, as well as Marguerite Pennick Parks and Debbie Irving. And this challenge was set up to just raise awareness, to start a discussion, to start really valuing and strengthening our values and how to dismantle racism.
One thing to keep in mind is that this series was, well, it had a start, a middle, and an end. So, for example, at the beginning, sort of the introductory part of this challenge was understanding the concepts of race, privilege, racism, and topics within those topics to just have a baseline, an understanding of why we're talking about this content and why we're participating in this challenge. The second part was examining how those concepts fit into our landscape here in Rochester. How does privilege, power, and equity impact the communities in our local area? And what examples do we have of those systems that are unequal? It's not just on an individual level, but it's also considering the environment and the environmental impact towards race and racial topics. So again, we started from understanding the terms to then applying those terms to the Rochester community and, the national community as well. We might be struck with some feelings, feeling like you want to change things and you're looking for ways to engage as an individual with your community to make things better. And so that process of becoming more aware, developing your awareness of the local communities, challenges, and your place in them can help you move to that next step of action. And so this was intentional. This was designed in a way to give you some action items at the end of this process. Education is the first step. Let's get started. In doing this type of work, I can't emphasize enough that it's so crucial for all of us to be on the same page with terminology. Diversity itself, what does that mean? It could mean so many things to different people. And that's really sort of the whole concept of diversity is welcoming different people of race, racial differences, ethnic differences, your social economic status might be different, your cultural differences, religion, gender. There are so many different ways that we are diverse. And those all fit within the definition of the term. So it's important that before you get started, you do the work to make sure that everyone's on the same page with what that term actually means. Next is inclusivity. It's really important that we have a shared understanding of what that term means. It's a commitment. We will be welcoming to everyone, despite their differences in background. And if there's someone who is being marginalized or kept out of the group, that we make sure we're not othering them and that we bring them into the circle. In addition to that work of trying to bring a person in, connects to that sense of belonging. That person might be invited into that space, but do they feel like they belong? Inclusivity goes further than just extending the invitation. It's making sure that that individual feels like they belong, that they can share their heart in that space, and that they can be a part of the group equally and fully. Equality. It's important that all of us have equal access to resources, to any sort of thing. And soon I'll talk a little bit more about equality because sometimes what's equal isn't always equitable. Those are two distinct terms. Equity means actually having an equivalent experience. Sometimes a person is given the same set of circumstances, but that doesn't make for an equitable experience. Let's say there's an interpreter placed in a space. If a person who is relying on interpreting is deafblind and needs a tactile interpreter, and the interpreter that shows up doesn't have those skills, that's not equal access. That's not the access that that person needs. And therefore, it's not equitable. So we'll talk more about that in a moment. The last term you see here is ally. Rachel's a great example of this in her partnering with me to present about this topic. Allyship is a verb, it's an action, but an ally is a person who commits to this action, to going out of their way to engage in the actions of making sure that things are more equitable, to dismantle systems of oppression, and to work towards inclusion of the entire community. If they see things that are outside of this shared vision of equality and equity, then they work to dismantle those systems. This also can apply to organizations. An ally doesn't have to be one individual, but it can be a group or an organization. Remember that I mentioned equity and equality and how those are distinct terms. I gave you the example of an interpreter. Perhaps there's a deaf-blind consumer, and they think that a hearing person who's not familiar with the community might think just having a regular interpreter would provide equality. But equity would be giving that person an interpreter who uses the communication system that's best for them. And that would be an interpreter who's familiar with tactile interpreting. Look at this graphic here. Equality. Everyone is given the same box to stand on. But when we think about this concept in terms of race, in terms of history, and thinking about segregation, for example, here in the United States, Both Black and white people were both given access to water fountains, but sometimes those water fountains or even segregated bathrooms, the ones that were available to people of color were not the same quality. I remember talking with my father about his experience using various educational resources that were donated to the quote colored school from other white schools in the area. Is that equal? I mean, they both were given access to education, but is it truly equitable? I want you to keep these things in mind. Look at this next picture that represents equity. Everyone has the opportunity to watch the show that's going on, and they have supports that meet their needs. All of the needs are different, and so all of the things that work to support them are different. People need different boxes of support to be able to see the show. We don't just stop at everyone gets a box and we move on because that's equal. We work harder to see what people actually need to make sure that we have an equitable solution. Racial justice, sometimes equality is not enough. We need to work to dismantle that fence that's up in the first place. Rather than giving people resources to be able to see over it, we need to dismantle the systems of oppression that make it unequal in the first place. I know this is deep, we're going into it, but we also really need to think beyond this concept of justice, which is breaking down those barriers, and get to the point of liberation. Liberation is making it possible that everyone has equal access, equitable access, and full opportunity to engage without needing to fight their way to that point, to fight to have access to an interpreter, to fight to have an equal access at the table or a spot at the table. That's truly the goal in this decolonizing framework is to get to liberation. Is it possible? I think it is. I've seen it in situations happen. It's very possible, but it takes work. And especially with race, it's complicated. It involves unpacking a lot of heavy topics, but again, it's certainly possible. Rachel, is there anything you wanted to add before we move on to the next slide?
So again, I really want to mention again, and thank you all for your patience with the slides. It's like, oh, you can move on without adding that slide, but the slides were added for a reason. And Hope in the chat mentioned that they're beautiful visuals. They are so great at showing the different levels and how things progress. It starts with talking about equality. And if that conversation hasn't ever happened, we would never reach the next level when talking about equity. We have to kind of start from the beginning, from the ground up. We have people saying we're good enough. Equity now is fine, but it is hard to hear that there are other issues as well. The system is a problem. It is a systemic problem. And so justice requires fighting to break down barriers, dismantle everything, and make sure that everybody has equal access. And then after all of this is accomplished, liberation is finally possible. We can see what it looks like. We can envision the future and how we're able to adapt to that and achieve liberation for everyone, where there are no barriers, where everything just happens naturally. Everything is equal and everybody has equitable chances because liberation has happened and all people have been liberated. But the point is, I have read a wonderful book called Untamed by an author whose name is Glennon. He wrote a book and he talks about women who want to figure out how their ideas have always fit into society. And they feel sometimes that situations aren't right for them. And so it's a way to kind of really look internally and figure out what is going on and figure out what is going on within yourself. And so this was written specifically for women, but it really applies to anybody. And it's really just kind of take a look inside and figure out who you want to be. And there's one chapter that's called Let It Burn. And that chapter talks about having everything completely torn down and be able to rebuild it for your life, your situation, whatever that means for you. It really takes some time to really think about who you are, who you've become, and what you want out of your life. And so that's a way that you can kind of look into yourself and figure out what your biases are, what you're talking about, all your experiences, what that means, and what you should remove and try to change, and what you need to keep for yourself. And that can very easily apply to this topic as well. You can choose to leave everything, keep it the way it is, think that everything is good enough, or you can think that we can change this. And honestly, the truth is that it's systemic. It is the system. The system has to be completely torn down and rebuilt. We have to let it burn and completely start over again in order to have this transformation happen within the system. And the only way to do that is to completely tear it down. And so I really enjoyed the book and how it relates to this slide. It gave me a really good visual to see like how we can go about fixing things, how we can make small improvements. But then in order to have liberation for all, our current system here in the US, I'm not sure you can do that without tearing it completely down.
The next part of the process here is to dissect. I think this part of the process is really neat because you have an opportunity to build upon all of the things that you've read, to reflect on the experiences that made you who you are, and think about maybe in this 21-day challenge, you might have read resources that have called you to reflect. Maybe you've had an emotional response to something. Have you learned something in this process? Did something surprise you along the way? Was there something that challenged you to look deeper within yourself? Maybe there's something that you learned in this process that you're now incorporating in your daily life. Or there's something that you've been practicing all along that you just looked at it in a different way because of this race and equity challenge.
It is also important that, well, Hope, I really appreciated your comment in the chat with empathy. That's a whole other presentation, a whole other um, talk to thing to talk about, and I'm willing to do that at some point. But let's see here. So it is sad, but we do have to keep moving forward, and so we do have to discuss, to listen, and we have to do. And everything that we've gained here and talked about today is a lot. And so now we have to talk about some actions. This conversation needs to continue. It should never stop. We think that liberation is going to happen, everything's going to be great, the world will be perfect, and that's not true. We do have to have realistic expectations. We have to continue to educate yourself, continue the discussion with people around you. We really do have to raise awareness. It's really important that you are consuming everything you can. Read books, articles, listen to podcasts if you want to. There are so many different ways that we can consume all of this information. And it's really important to, again, continue this discussion. We're wrapping up here. We did the 21-day challenge. They have a huge wrap up. They had several thousand people that took this challenge all over the country. There were over 100,000 people who signed up and did this challenge to raise awareness, to start the discussion, to continue our progress. And this right here is going to pull everybody up and be on the same page and not go back into the past and continue to listen. That is so important. We cannot do the work if we are just sitting there and constantly talking without listening. We have to have a dialogue. We have to listen to each other. We have two eyes, two ears, whatever language you use. We all have our mouths. We need to be listening more than we are talking. And so it is really important to consume as much information as you can and continue to be active and pull up those sleeves and just get into the work and start doing that.
And often I feel folks are left with this sentiment of what to do next. Many of you are already doing this work. Perhaps in your upbringing, in your prior experiences, that has given you a foundation. And now, from this 21 Equity Challenge, you've started to unpack that and you've started to feel the tensions within your background and starting to recognize systems of oppression. And that might feel uncomfortable. That, in and of itself, is huge. Rachel and I were talking about this before, that often we don't consider those little small shifts that happen completely internally as significant. When folks do this work in their everyday action of just consuming more information and learning about this, it helps shift their mindset to develop equitable solutions when challenges occur. And learning more about this will bleed into just the everyday actions that you take. Sometimes it can be overwhelming and just consuming all of this information and trying to learn more about it. But I want to just say that this will show up in your life the more you read about it, the more you consume this. On a macro level, it's important to consider government systems. That's these larger systems that we interact with in our daily life. We are given information from systems at a macro level. And we also need to consider the community level, religious groups, cultural groups, on a family level. And then the micro level, the individual. How are my thoughts and feelings and beliefs impacting my life and the lives of those around me? And what individual actions can I take that will impact the community level, but also the systemic level? These choices are impacted by privilege. Those who have privilege might be able to dismantle some systems that are inequitable. Those who do not have privilege perhaps can support by being an ally. I think it's important that everyone here, being open to learning from other people's perspectives, have an invitation to make a difference. It basically starts with being introspective, to having those conversations. And then that will have a bigger impact on both the macro and micro level, right, Rachel? Is there anything else that I should add?
Right, you start big and you start at that macro level, and then you go to that meso level and end up at that micro level. And so it's important to involve that community in the discussion. And then as you get more down to like the micro level, you start to go and look introspectively, then you go and look, what can I do? And it's not that you're going to ignore everything that you see, you have to start challenging it. And then as you start to do that work, then it's going to start making an impact at the micro level. So sorry, this slide was a little bit confusing, but the point here is still remains. You have to talk about something and start that discussion. And it really always starts with yourself.
Just remember a few parting thoughts. We've talked about this already, really, but listening matters. It's so important to actively listen to other people's truths and perspectives. It's important to honor people's stories, especially when they're sharing their heart with you. In the chat, I believe it was Kat, mentioned that some of the statistics about Rochester, our community, were surprising. It was hard to believe, it was hard to take in. And often it feels paralyzing not knowing what to do after we see those statistics. I think it's important that we share them. Of course, I wasn't surprised in a sense, but I was shocked to see that people who live in Pittsburgh have a longer lifespan than those who live in the city of Rochester. I mean, that, if nothing else hits home, I don't know what would. It can't get any more personal than that. Right in your backyard, right here in Rochester. This isn't some national systemic problem, just numbers. These are people. This is information that applies to our community in Rochester. And so representation matters. Taking action is important. Every person makes up this community, and there's such diversity in this community. And diversity contributes to a beautiful world, a creative world. But we need to be open and accepting to people as they are, as they come. Also, keep in mind that this is not a fight you need to do alone. This is not a fight of one person. I was very intentional when I asked Rachel to basically lead this presentation, co facilitate this, because it is not the responsibility of myself as a Black person, the diversity chair, to be leading this conversation alone. We need allies, folks who have privilege, folks who have access to work together and collaborate to dismantle these systems. Again, just keep in mind that this is not a fight to be done alone. It requires community.
So be the model is if you see something, say something, never stop. If the good people never say anything, nothing's ever going to change.